Hope. Hope. It's hard to live without hope. Matter of fact, made the statement here a while back in another series that you can't live a minute without hope. We need hope in our lives and we need healing. Our lives aren't perfect, and so because of that, we need some healing. We need some things to take place. Things happen in our lives, and we just need to be healed sometimes, even in ways that sometimes we don't know about until God takes care of them for us. Today we're going to look at a story from Jesus. Now, actually, today's story took place right before last week's sermon took place. Okay, the scripture from last week. So Jesus goes over to the other side of the lake of Galilee, or the Sea of Galilee, and then he comes back. And when he's coming back, and with his disciples, when the boat reaches shore, Jairus from last week, and he comes and grabs Jesus and said, "Come on, you got to get over here because my daughter's dying." So you remember the story from last week. So this is what's happening before. A few days before last week, I made the change. First off, I wanted to put emphasis on being first, with putting first our children. That was one of the things. The second thing is we're going to talk about being on the other side of things. And today is World Communion Sunday, and while we won't be partaking in the bread and juice, we will do a remembrance in a few moments of that. So Luke chapter 8, we get to verse 26, and this is right before I said last week's was going on last week. In verse 26 it says this: Jesus and his disciples sailed to the Gerasenes land, which is across the lake, or from the Sea of Galilee. Across the lake from Galilee, rather. So I actually like the wording from Mark's gospel. A couple of words there better, because Mark says that Jesus and his disciples went to the other side. Went to the other side. And there was a clear division in that day for the people in Jesus' day between the two sides of the Sea of Galilee. So when you look at this map, the map shows the two sides, or it did in the first service. It showed two sides. There it is. It works twice. So if you notice, there's a little green or something line at the very top, and that's the Jordan River. This is a little hard to see there, but the Jordan River comes in the north side of the Sea of Galilee, and it comes in and fills the Sea of Galilee, and then out the south side, the Jordan River runs down kind of close to Jerusalem, and then ends up in the Dead Sea, where that's the end of that water. So you see that. So on this side of Galilee is of the Sea of Galilee is what we call Galilee. This is where Jesus did a lot of his ministry. This is where Bethlehem is, or rather Nazareth is. And so Jesus did a lot of ministry over here. And so if you take the line directly down from the Jordan River in the north and the south, if you went past that, they would say you were going to the other side. So if you Capernaum, you can see a kind of a pink name up there, longer name. If you went from there over to Bethsaida, which is the other pink word at the very top on the right side of the Jordan River, if you went from Capernaum to Bethsaida, they would say you're going to the other side because you're going on the other side of the Jordan River's division of that. They were very particular about the way they divided things up. So it would take about 2 to 5 hours to cross the Sea of Galilee, depending on where you were at, where you're going, and what the weather was like when you were doing that. And so Jesus and his disciples, he said he wanted to go to the land of the Gerasenes. So where he was headed was what we call the Decapolis. So the Decapolis is the land of 10 cities. Okay, so a lot of these cities were cities that the Romans had come in when they took over. They built these cities very specifically for their own use. They would validate the Roman culture. So this is a place where, it was the enemy territory. Okay, so when you see the Decapolis on this side on that side rather of Galilee, you have all this, what was considered the enemy territory. The people there were pagans. The Decapolis, the place of 10 cities, is where the seven nations from Canaan, the seven Canaan nations settled. It was filled with pagan temples, featuring the exaltation of violence, of lewd sexual expression, of greed, and all these things that had to be gotten rid of in Israel so that the people would not be swayed to follow them, and they would continue to follow God. And moreover, the pig, which was the most unclean animal in Israel, according to Israel, was regarded as sacred and was used in worship on the other side. Okay, so that was a big deal. Now, I want to mention about the people of Canaan being moved. Well, first off, the Jews regarded the other side as a place where Satan lived. That was the place that was dark, it was evil, it was oppressive, it was demonic, that felt, and so no one went to the other side, even a rabbi. I mean, the only way a person went to the other side of the Jordan normally, and to go to the other side, was if you went down and you were going from, let's say, Nazareth or the Galilee area down to Jerusalem, because Samaria was in the middle and they didn't like the Samaritans either, they might cross and just walk right across the Jordan River, right by the Jordan River, to get down and to go to Jerusalem. But they didn't go normally to the other side. So in the Old Testament, remember, in the Old Testament, God promised to drive the Canaanites, the Hittites, the Hivites, the Perizzites, the Girgashites, the Amorites, and the Jebusites, those 7 nations. God promised to drive them out of the land and give it to Israel. Now, if you remember way back, God made this covenant with Abraham and gave Abraham the land that is now that is Israel. God gave him that land. And then, if remember, as they were living in that land, they had this drought, and Joseph had been sold into slavery, but in Egypt, so they went down to Egypt. Joseph helped save them through God. God saved them through Joseph, rather, and so they were able to live and flourish and actually become a nation of well over 1 million people, maybe a couple of million people, during that time, a family of a couple of million people while they were in Egypt. Well, when God then delivered them from Egypt, they came back up, and all that land, because it's the best land in the region, had been taken over by these other nations. And so when they got back, then they drove those 7 nations out and given them to Israel. And so these 7 nations have moved across the Sea of Galilee, across the Jordan River, into the area which was the Decapolis now, and had settled there. And so that was where they were at. Decapolis was also the center of Roman culture, of Roman power, rather. It housed a legion of soldiers, which legion is an interesting word here, but it's probably 4,000 to 6,000 soldiers were there. It wouldn't take them any time to go anywhere in Israel or that area to take care of issues they might have, string somebody up on a tree, crucify them, and go back home. So I want us to get the picture of the pictures that people in Jesus' day saw when they talked about the other side. I want us to kind of get that feeling that we know. So then the question comes up, but what does Jesus want to go to the other side for? What's he doing? Didn't he know that the kingdom of God is for our side? I mean, don't we ask God sometimes, are you with us? When we should be asking God, are we really with you? But anyway, it's almost like Jesus didn't know that this was the other side. It was like he kind of missed that somehow, that was the dark, evil place. It was almost as if he thought maybe that's his side too. And it's almost like he thought every side, both sides, belonged to him, or that he belonged to both sides. It's almost as if he thought that all the people of the earth were now going to be blessed through him, even the 7 nations of Canaan, which had been so evil. Jesus says, let's go over to the other side. I'm guessing the disciples were not very happy, but they seemed to follow him, and they did it. So they rode and they went off to the other side. And if we had a little extra time, we'd grab a guitar and maybe sing Row, Row, Row Your Boat, right? Until we got over there? No. Okay, let's not do that. Okay, so they traveled to the Decapolis, to the country of the Gerasenes. And let's continue the story. This is verse 27. Next verse. It says, as soon as Jesus got out of the boat, a certain man met him. The man was from the city and was possessed by demons. For a long time he had lived among the tombs, naked and homeless. When he saw Jesus, he shrieked and fell down before him. Then he shouted, what have you to do with me, Jesus, Son of the Most High God? I beg you, don't torture me. He said this because Jesus had already commanded the unclean spirit to come out of the man. Many times it had taken possession of him, so he would be bound with leg irons and chains and placed under guard. But he would break his restraints, and the demon would force him into the wilderness. Jesus asked him, what is your name? Legion, he replied. Have you heard that name? Have that word yet? Legion, he replied, because many demons had entered him. So when they land, they're on go to the other side. If it took 2 to 5 hours, they're on the other side. And when they landed, the large crowds that had followed Jesus did not follow him over to the other side. They were absent. Their reception committee was a single, deranged, tormented, tomb-dwelling, self-mutilating demoniac. What a welcome committee, right? He was so disruptive to his own community, his own town, his own village, that he was thrown out. But he fell on his knees before Jesus and said, what do you want with me? In God's name, don't torture me. Now, isn't it interesting that the very spirit or demon that would torture a human being so much would ask not to be tortured? I mean, you would think, tit for tat, right? But that's not the case. But then Jesus comes back and says, as the evil spirits, he said, what's your name? And the response was Legion, for we are many. Now remember, this legion is a word that's loaded in this story, and it's in their time as well. There was a legion of the foreign soldiers, remember that? The enemy, the Romans, who came into town, and if you looked at them wrong, they crucified you. And this is where they lived. So the word legion was a reminder of the enemies all around you. Verse 31 goes on and it says that they pleaded with him not to order them to go back into the abyss. A large herd of pigs was feeding on the hillside, and the demons begged, Jesus, let us go into the pigs. And Jesus gave them permission. And the demons left the man and entered the pigs. The herd rushed down the cliff into the lake and drowned. So the spirits, the demons, asked to be sent into 2,000 pigs that were there, and they rushed to their destruction. I don't guess that really helped the demons all that much, but anyway, that's what they did. And now remember that the pig is also the symbol of Roman power. Remember at the boar's head. And so this man, I guess you could think of one level, is delivered from the legion, from the Roman power. But then going on verse 34, it says this, when those who tended the pigs saw what had happened, they ran away and told the story in the city and in the countryside. People came to see what had happened. They came to Jesus and found the man from whom the demons had gone. He was sitting at Jesus' feet, fully dressed and completely sane. They were filled with awe. Those people who had actually seen what had happened told them how the demon-possessed man had been delivered. Then everyone gathered from the region of the Gerasenes asked Jesus, listen to this, asked Jesus to leave their area because they were overcome with fear. So he got into the boat and returned across the lake. The man from whom the demons had gone begged to come along with Jesus as one of his disciples. And Jesus sent him away, saying, return home and tell the story of what God has done for you. So he went through the city proclaiming what Jesus had done for him. Now, the people's response was fascinating to me. It just is. I mean, those tending the pigs ran off, and they reported about this man's deliverance, right? They reported the whole town, hey, the guy we've had issues with his whole life that we can't handle, that comes and goes berserk on us, and we tie him up, we put chains on him, he breaks the chains. The people on the other side, they came over to see what happened. They saw this crazed man was dressed in his right mind, and he was sitting at the feet of Jesus, it says. But they didn't respond to the miracle the way that those in Galilee did, or the way those in Jerusalem did. They didn't start bringing their sick children and crippled friends to Jesus so he could heal them. What did they do? They begged him to go away, to leave. But why would they beg him to go away? Why would they want him to leave? I assume it's because he had power like they hadn't seen, and he wasn't one of them. I mean, he was from the wrong side, right? He was from the wrong side, and he might use his power to hurt them someday. You know, Jesus doesn't ever stay where he's not wanted, and so he leaves. He agreed to go. And then here's this man who has been demon-possessed for much of his life. The demons just keep haunting him, and he begs, Jesus, can I go with you? Can I be a disciple? Now remember, this is Jesus who usually tells his followers, say, follow me, and I will make you fish for people. Or drop what you're doing and follow me. That's what we normally hear Jesus say, but not here. Jesus said no. He said, go tell your story to your friends. Tell them how much the Lord has done for you. And tell them what he has shown, or showed the mercy that he has shown you. Tell them about the mercy he has shown. So imagine how this man feels when the boat rowed away and he wasn't in it. If it was in our society today, we would ask a lot of questions. Am I from the wrong side of the lake? Is my skin a different color? Do I have the wrong political leaning? I mean, we would go through a whole list of names of why we think Jesus wouldn't let us go with him, right? We could come up with all kinds of good reasons. But why did he leave the man there? Why did he tell him no? He wanted him to be his disciple in his own place, in his own country, in his own world. You see, it was just for Jesus that was the other side. It was just for the disciples that this was the other side. It was for the people of Israel, this was the other side. For them, that was their home. And so the boat rows away. That man's not in it. And then what does he do? He goes and tells the people in the Decapolis, all these 10 cities, he goes around and starts talking about, telling them how much Jesus has done for him. And apparently, the people were amazed. I mean, let's think for a moment about Jesus' power over demons. I want to stop for a minute and just talk about this power over the demons. I know my process for the ministry or this sermon today is telling the story, but let's think about Jesus' power over the demons. See, we tend to think of a good fight as two similar entities duking it out, where on any given day, either one of them could win, right? I mean, like a good college football game. Yeah, I mean, that's how Vegas makes their money, right? You know that, don't you? That's how they make their money, because anybody could give and everybody wants their team to win. But see, here's the thing. When God's involved in a fight, it's totally different. See, when God is involved, I mean, God is the creator. He's the only creator. No one created him. And any fight with something or someone that he's in with had to be a created thing. And so you have the creator of the universe that's up against somebody that's a created person that has decided to rebel against the creator. See, so there's no devil who could create the universe. No demon could save a life. I mean, after all, what we find that evil does, it usually tears down our world. It tears down life. No power, it doesn't matter how numerous its followers or how daunting it may be in appearance, can enter the ring with God and expect to hold its own. It just can't. It's never a question of the evil forces combining to strike a blow to God, and they're going to work and weaken him, and so finally they can win. It's not that. Rather, just a word from God and evil is defeated. No fight, no battle, no wondering, no question. There is no equal dark side that can stand up to the power and the goodness of God. It doesn't exist. So I think in our community, in our world, we kind of get a little confused about that sometimes because we've seen all the Star Wars things or Star Trek. I get them all confused. Whichever one it is, you have the people that wear the white suits, you have the people that wear the black suits, and they come together, and hopefully the good people will win and the dark people almost win. I mean, after all, isn't that what most of the movies that are written are about? And finally, by the skin of their teeth, the good wins. Hopefully. So we get confused sometimes in our world thinking that this is the way it is with God and the devil. And that's just not the case, folks. Just a word. Just a word. He doesn't have to get in shape. God doesn't. He doesn't have to work out. He doesn't have to get in weight training. You get down to the ideal weight. He doesn't have to do that. Just a word. Jesus spoke the word. And they had to leave. Think about that. Just a word. So, all right. I'm off my soapbox. I'll come back to my story. So what has God done for you? What has God done for you? I mean, what is your story of God working in your life? See, when you answer that question, and then you start telling your friends your story of what God has done, then the world gets transformed. That's the reason a few years back as Methodists we added in our membership thing, we added witness because we need to be a witness to our world so the world can be transformed. That's so important, part of what we need to do. Okay, but there's more to the story of Jesus' ministry to the other side. It doesn't end with one trip and one man's life being changed. Jesus returns to the Decapolis not very long following this, and this is actually recorded in Mark 7. And I won't read all of this, but I'll start the story and then I'll end it. But you can go back to Mark 7 and 8, chapter 7 and 8, if you'd like to read that. Let me go to verse 31 of chapter 7. It says that after leaving the region of Tyre, Jesus went through Sidon toward the Galilee Sea, through the region of the 10 cities, or the Decapolis. Some people brought to him a man who was deaf, who could hardly speak, and they begged him to place his hands on the man for healing. Jesus took him away from the crowd by himself and put his fingers in the man's ears, and then he spit and touched the man's tongue. Looking into heaven, Jesus sighed deeply and said, Ephphatha, which means open up. At once, his ears opened, his tongue, or twisted tongue, was released, and he began to speak clearly. So this time the great crowds came to see him. This was one of many people who came to see Jesus. It's different than one person, right? Different than one person being the only one who comes to see Jesus. Now they start bringing their sick people to Jesus to be healed. And apparently the former demoniac had really been sharing his story with a lot of people. So in other words, what's happening now, has so many levels. This is a great story. The 7 nations of Canaan, the people that had been displaced because they were so evil and wicked, and were still being wicked on this side, these people had now begun praising God, the God of Israel. Praising the God of Israel. Think about that. For the first time, the first time Jesus went over to the other side, no one was home except for this pathetic wretch of a man. The second time he came actually was one of the most dramatic responses in all of the New Testament. Matter of fact, it's these kind of times that when the term, Jesus uses the phrase like, a prophet is not without honor in his own town. Or prophet is without honor in his own town, excuse me. But people were more receptive to Jesus here than they'd ever been anywhere. And so they had heard now that Jesus cared about someone on their side. Do you remember the story about Jesus feeding the 5,000? One of those great stories. I want you to listen to the end of this story from Mark 7 and 8 because Jesus does something very similar on the other side when he's there this second time. Jesus feeds 4,000 people on the other side. 4,000. There are a few loaves of bread and a few fish, and 4,000 people eat, and there's 7 baskets of leftovers. Pretty awesome, right? Now, Jesus didn't just love the people on the right side of the issue or on the right side of being chosen people. He didn't just love the people on the right side of issues there, but he loved them all. He didn't just minister to the best and the brightest. We see that in the story. He didn't save the big miracles for just the chosen ones. Jesus loved and fed the people on the other side too. But it really shouldn't surprise us that the disciples still didn't get it. Sometimes I think maybe Jesus didn't let this man from this demoniac, this fresh person of great faith, sometimes I think why he didn't let him join his party and go with him is because he didn't want him to get unfaithful, like sometimes the disciples were. I think maybe they weren't the best people to be around sometimes. But Jesus loved and fed the people on this side, but they didn't get it. Later, Jesus talks to them, and this happens a little bit later on, and they're talking about bread, and they're talking about who's the greatest, how they did. And so Jesus is talking about needing people in need, feeding people in need, and he did that with just what was available. And so in Mark 8, chapter 8, verses 18 through 20, he says this, "Don't you have eyes? Can't you see? Don't you have ears? Why can't you hear? Don't you remember? When I broke 5 loaves of bread for those 5,000 people, how many baskets full of leftovers did you gather?" And they answered 12. "And when I broke 7 loaves of bread for those 4,000 people, how many baskets full of leftovers did you gather?" And they answered 7. So this theme of Jesus loving the people on the other side, it is beneath the surface of when Jesus fed the 5,000 on Israel's side and when he fed the 4,000 on the other side. When Jesus fed the crowd on Israel's side of the lake, the disciples collected 12 baskets of food. I don't know, maybe it represents the 12. I've heard a lot of things about this, but maybe it represents the 12 tribes of Israel. I heard one preacher say, well, that way each disciple got his own basket of food, but I kind of doubt that was really the reason. But maybe it stood for each of the 12 tribes of Israel. When Jesus fed the crowd on the other side, they collected 7 baskets of food, of leftovers, which might represent 12 nations, or the 7 nations, of Canaan. It's almost as if Jesus was saying, good news is coming for you, 12 tribes. But also good news is coming for you, 7 nations of Canaan too. 12 tribes, 7 nations. It really doesn't matter to me, I think, what Jesus is saying. He says, I love them all. I love you all. It's good news for this side, and it's good news for the other side as well. And so as I close, even in our economy today, In a nation that is so divided, Jesus doesn't separate us out. In a place and a time where people make such a big deal about how deep your tan is, in a time and a place where people make such a big deal about which person you would select for president, in a time and a place where everybody wants to feel like they've been victimized by everybody else, and so we're just all victims, and everybody else is against us. That's what it feels like. Even in that economy, Jesus doesn't care which side you're on because Jesus loves you. He does. You know, whichever side you most closely relate to, my question for you is this: whichever side you're on, in your own land, whether you feel like you're on the side or the other side, whichever, my question for you is this: will you help Jesus spread the good news that He loves all sides in our world today? Will you do that?